Welcome to our panel, Creative Platform for BCC, to be a global museum. It gives me great pleasure, great honor to introduce my dear friend, Dr. Omar Kholeif. Dr. Omar, or Dr. O, Storba. Omar Kholeif is a Manilow Senior Curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art of Chicago, Museum of Contemporary Art of Chicago, and is also head of the Global Vision, Director of the Global Vision Initiative, we will talk about today, and recently announced as a co-curator of Sharjah Biennial 14, which takes place in March 2019. So we've got plenty to talk about with Omar. Initially, Omar was supposed to interview me, but in the last 10 minutes, this switched. It looks like I'll be interviewing you, Omar.
Sure, whatever you want.
So this is going to be a conversation. One thing you must know is we have no ID within the audience. We can't see anything. So it might just be you and I in this room because the light is so strong. And we invite you to participate, comment. We want this to be a conversation, not just between Omar and I, but also including yourselves.
Just raise your hand so a microphone can come to you, and so that we can, because we really can't see or potentially hear you from, we're very far. So that's just.
Very well.
And do I introduce you? So yeah, I'm delighted to introduce Sultan Sooud Al Qassemi, who is a writer and commentator, and also the founder of the Barjeel Art Foundation in Sharjah, which is an incredible collection of modern and contemporary Arab art, of which I've had the privilege to work over a number of years. And we'll talk to you a little bit about a collaboration that we did at the White Chocolate Gallery in London in 2015-16. But seeing that you're interviewing me now and you're in control, I will hand it to you. I'm controlling the clicker, Sultan is controlling the interview. You guys can talk whenever you want. Just raise your hands and someone with a mic will be here to bring one to you. So, let's go.
So, Omar and I's collaboration with regards to taking art from the region global, I started in 2015, but it also continues until 2017, where I was invited by the Museum of Contemporary Art of Chicago, thanks to the director there, the board of trustees, and I recently joined your institution. So you and I are now colleagues and not just collaborators.
Technically, you're my boss.
Technically, yes. So I'll be writing a report back to the board about this time.
We have some of the board here in the audience, actually, so they can also.
Wonderful. So we're going to be talking about what makes a museum global. Is it the collection? Is it the program of exhibitions? Is it the residency programs? Can a museum that was set up to be a local museum turn itself into a global museum? Or do you have to set up a museum from scratch? This is a great example that we're looking at now on the screen. The Tate Modern Museum was only constructed, in the early 2000s?
It opened in the year 2000.
And now it is considered one of the best it's seen as an example or a template for a global museum, am I right?
Yes.
What makes this museum so special that it's a global?
Well, it's interesting because you're talking about what makes a local museum global, and actually the Tate Gallery began as very much a local museum in many respects, because Tate Gallery focused largely on British art. And when they opened the Tate Modern, they decided that they wanted to make it a global modern and contemporary art museum, and the way that they did that was by thinking through their collection, and how the collection could be a node or a thinking point to build all the exhibitions around. And they developed a series of regional acquisition committees, which literally covers the whole world. The Middle East and South Asia has a committee called the MANAC, and these are groups of patrons who work with curators who have global but also regional knowledge, who propose acquisitions that these committees acquire. They then don't go into a regional collection, they go into the whole Tate collection that's non-hierarchically kind of organized, and they hang the collection in a way that you could see a Salwa Rawda Shi'er next to a Soluit, or a Shafi Aboud next to a John Mitchell. And so really it's trying to insert something like the Arab narrative into a global context. So it's very much global in that regard, but also in that it doesn't divide things by region. It's not it's actually looking at the whole history of modern and contemporary.
Who here has, I can't see your hand, but I believe that you put your hand up. Who here has been to the new Tate, the extension? Okay. So you've seen the Middle Eastern artworks, and I obviously have a sort of Middle Eastern artworks bias. But as you said, I mean, it made me very proud to see works by Arab artists, by Turkish artists, by Iranian artists, hanging at the Tate Modern. And as you said, it wasn't compartmentalized. It wasn't a room that was separated. And they have a big collection of Salwa Rada Shaqairs. So my question to you, do you think that exhibition of the Salwa Rada Shaqairs that took place in 2014, I mean? 13. Was that exhibition an initiative of the Menak, or was that an initiative of the museum itself? How did that work?
Well, my understanding is that the collection, well, the majority of the museum is actually the collection that's free, and then the special exhibitions are paid for. And Salwa Shaqair was someone that at the time Jessica Morgan, the Scalopoulos curator, was looking at her work, and they had already acquired some of her work. And she proposed an exhibition of her work, and actually that exhibition is the only exhibition of Tate Modern to be extended twice. And one of the things that's particularly fascinating to me is that the public in Britain fell in love with the story of this woman, this Druze woman living in Lebanon, making these architectural forms, and actually a name that's very difficult to pronounce in the Western world actually became one that almost became very familiar to a whole group of people. So for me, that's a great example of how you can start introducing your book. And I think it's a very brave thing for a museum that is driven a lot, it has to attract a huge attendance to show such a tradition. Did. So it was fantastic.
As you said, it was extended twice, even overlapped with another regional artist, Ibrahim Salahi exhibition, and they both drew tens of thousands of visitors. Now, my question is this. I want to go a bit deeper into these committees that they have, the Latin America Committee, the Middle Eastern Committee. When these committees purchase works, and I know how we work at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, but how does the Tate work? When the committee meets and they look over a list of works to buy, do they look at the entire collection and say this work fits in the collection, or do you think that, or should museums look and say this work absolutely is a good work, or do we think this work actually fits with these 1950s?
So obviously I don't work at Tate, so
we're just discussing.
But I have had many conversations because I've been very interested in researching the model of the Menak Committee specifically, which was something that I included in my doctoral thesis research. And I have interviewed some members of the Middle East and North Africa Acquisition Committee. And the way that it works is that the curators present works of art that they feel dialogue with the holdings of the Middle East and North Africa acquisitions, but also works that dialogue with the collection more broadly. So works that deal with themes such as abstraction, minimalism, and so forth. And they make a case for a particular work to fit into the collection because they say they'll be able to show it in conversation with X, Y, Z, and then the committee votes on it. So that's my understanding.
And this is how some American museums as well operate, where they have committees. They're not regional, they're not compartmentalized, or they're not specialized regions. They're larger committees, and they're presented with works. And more, and thanks to fairs like Art Abu Dhabi and other fairs, when the trustees or when the members of the committees visit fairs like Abu Dhabi Art, they get exposed to international artists. They take it back to the museum. They say, we like this African art, we like this Asian artist. We want to include her in our collection. Who pays for these? Who pays for these? I wonder.
For the works that are done at the fair?
No, for the works that the committees, the subcommittees, again, talking about the globalization of the museums. Who pays for these? I have an answer, but I want to hear your answer.
You mean in American museums or in British museums?
Let's answer each one.
Well, in the case of for example, the Tate, or in not even the Tate, but many of these organizations, it often is a group of patrons who are invited because of their expertise. They put in an amount of money that helps create a pot, but also in the UK there is government funding, but often it is individual patrons, which is why I think one of the most important things that I always advocate for is that patronage, especially in the Middle East and South Asia, is absolutely essential to us continuing and having our narrative visible in the Western context. In the United States, it really differs from museum to museum. So it could be that a museum has an endowment, for example, for acquisitions generally, and that endowment is used in particular ways. That endowment is often invested, and an amount of interest comes out of that then creates an acquisition budget. But a lot of it comes actually from the generosity of people who, for example, many museums are becoming more global, and in the US, people are bringing museum groups to parts of the world like this to come and introduce them through fairs like this and others to these artists, and they explain to them how these artists could dialogue with other works in the collection. And it is often the generosity of these individuals who say, you know what, I'm going to buy this work for the museum as a full gift, or I'm going to buy it for you as a promised gift, which is another thing that is not very common in Europe, actually, where a collector can actually buy a work and hold it and have it in their home for a number of years and then fully gift it to the museum.
When they die, or
no,
before?
It can be at any point that they decide.
I feel that gives an incentive to the institution that person dies. So we have to be careful.
No, not necessarily. It actually, basically there are lots of reasons. It could be that the collector suddenly has limited wall space and they want to give the work away, or it could be that the museum wants it for a show and they say now you can keep it, or it could also be, for example, that one of the amazing things about the United States is that you get tax breaks when you make a full
Not
gift.
100%, but you get a decent percentage.
You can claim a deduction from your taxes for a gift that you give to a museum, and the value of the deduction is based on the retail value of the work at the time of being given as a full gift.
Including gallery commission?
No, gallery commissions is not included.
Does everybody here understand how this works when you get tax breaks? Hands up if you don't. Okay, I can't see your hands, but I assume everybody understands.
Most institutions have very limited resources in terms of acquisitions, because most institutions, contemporary art institutions especially, are having to fundraise for exhibitions, and many of their publics are only familiar with a particular kind of artist. So one of the great things that has happened is that people have gone to people like yourself and others and said, can you chip in a certain percentage to enable us to acquire this work? Or we have 50% of the works in our budget, can you pay the other 50%? And of course that person is recognized every time that work is shown, which also helps create a legacy for you, the collector or the patron. But what's most interesting for me about that whole process is that it's a way for us to start to slowly influence and disseminate art from other regions by showing our generosity. Because if you are not generous, I feel like people could lose interest in a particular region because they say, well, there's no way that we can fund this, no way that we can sustain this, so maybe we go to a different region, or maybe we do something else. And it's fundamental.
Can I play devil's advocate here?
Yeah.
I feel like some museums in the West, they've had budgets in hundreds of millions of dollars to buy, I'm going to buy this Picasso for 100 million. And then they come to Middle Eastern artists, we sell our works for peanuts, 10,000, 20,000, they say we want someone to buy it for us. So I feel, I don't know, I mean, sometimes I see this, like there's a major museum that emailed me a while ago, and they said, we want to buy this artwork by a Middle Eastern artist. And I looked at the budget, it wasn't that high. But you know what? You have to step up, as you said. And the other thing is, I want to say, first of all, I want to salute Omar for really not representing the region, but coming from the region and being a curator in one of the most important museums in North America. And you see a difference. You see a difference how, and it shows you it's an initiative by the museum. Someone like Omar, being involved with this museum, internationalizes and globalizes the museum. I was doing research for an article. I sent you the draft of it, looking for how many people from the Middle East sit on, American museum boards. And by the way, when I say my region, I really include Africa, South Asia, this Menasa region, as Omar is fond of as well. And I want to see more of us as patrons, as donors, as sponsors, trustees, and I came across half a dozen names. And it can't be a region that has, I think there's between Morocco and South Asia, there's what, 1.5 billion of us plus, and we need to have more people in these boards. So what can we do? I mean, how can we get more people from this region into boards in Europe and elsewhere?
Well, it's a two-way conversation. There needs to be access to a conversation and a platform, which is why events like fairs and biennials are important, because they allow a platform to introduce people to each other. They start a conversation, and that is what creates that. We, for example, in our case, we had an ongoing conversation, and you can argue that that was enabled by platforms such as these. However, there are not enough of these platforms, and some of these platforms can seem very alien to particular people who aren't necessarily familiar with the context of what an art fair or biennial might look like in the Middle East, and vice versa. Someone from here might not feel inclined to go to the US for any number of reasons, and so there isn't a meeting point to have a discussion. There needs to be a meeting point and more meeting points that then enable a conversation. Once a conversation begins, a relationship can emerge, and those relationships develop over time, shared interests emerge, and that's how people become on boards and of these institutions. I think it's very important. We live in a global world and in a global context, and more institutions should be reflecting not only the dynamic context in which the world exists, but also the fact that their communities are very diverse in America, which is a country that is made of immigrants. So it's an essential thing.
Can I talk about many tongues?
You can talk about whatever you want.
So this was not really, this is such an impromptu conversation that Omar and I have not had a chance to talk about this. And Omar is very modest, but he hasn't mentioned that Omar is curating an exhibition called Many Tongues, which opens in the fall of 2019. That exhibition is, it's 2 years away, and it's already winning awards. Omar won an award last week. Is it last week? When I saw you in the US. Yeah. Congratulations. And it's a Sotheby's Prize for a yet-to-be-mounted exhibition. So you send a proposal, and they say this. They think a group from the jury. They look at the exhibition. They say, "We like this show. We think this show is of importance," and they grant you an amount of money. Am I right?
Yeah. So it was an open call process where we submitted our draft checklists and our overview and our research, and incredible jury including Nicholas Sirota, Okwi Nwezer, Donna DeSalvo, Connie Butler, and Alan Schwartzman chose this exhibition, and another one were tied for the top prize.
Yeah. And because they were both amazing exhibitions, although I have a bias to yours.
I think ours is better too, yes. Even though.
So that's, for example, a very interesting grant. A major institution grants an exhibition that has not started, and the curator puts together submits the idea, and they mount the exhibition. So this exhibition is taking place at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago 2 years from now, and brings together art from North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia.
Yeah.
And this is a major exhibition. It hasn't happened ever in America, am I right?
Yeah, so the exhibition, Many Tongues, is subtitled Art, Language, and Revolution in the Middle East and South Asia. And it is an exhibition that runs from 1947, during the beginning of partition between India and Pakistan, or so-called independence, and runs to the present. And what I was trying to do really is think about this idea of the transcultural exhibition and the regional group show, and to think, how can it be different? The first thing that I thought about was that South Asia and West Asia and North Africa shared a history of decolonization, and there were these incredible movements between artists who literally hopped about these places and were influencing each other and came from similar traditions. and then created a context that enabled the contemporary to happen. And so this exhibition tries to map that history for over 250 works that really presents this narrative. It's presented across 15,000 square feet, and it is arguably the largest exhibition ever mounted in the US of art from this particular region. So we're very excited to be staging it, but what's more important for me and for the institution is the outcomes of what an exhibition like this can do. It's not simply about saying we mounted the biggest show of X, Y, Z.
What are the outcomes?
The outcome is really to try and shift some of our perspectives of what art history is, to move towards something that is more global, that is less Western and Eurocentric, and to say that we are part of a world where there are multiple histories and multiple center points. It isn't only Paris, London, and New York where artists were creating particular forms of avant-garde. There were other centers in and around the world. And so, for example, this image that I put here is a work that is on the checklist. We haven't requested it yet, so I don't know if it will be in the show, but a work by Sudanese modernist, arguably modernist, you could say, called Ibrahim Salahi. And so the show actually has artists like that. But what's another thing that it makes the show different is it's not organized chronologically, it's actually organized thematically to illustrate how movements and trends still continue to this present day.
And also the fact that this show is taking place in a museum, like I'm sorry I'm going to plug the MCA for a bit, but the MCA is one of those museums in America that was founded with a major collection of Western art, and in general, if I'm not mistaken, Omar, a lot of the works that were shown there were by Western American artists. And so for a museum like that to be taking a step, it really is a step towards globalization. It's a step towards showing a city and a country a work that they are not generally exposed to.
Yes. Well, the MCA actually began as a Kunsthalle. It was the post-war period, and there was this real kind of resistance to
What's a Kunsthalle, sorry?
A Kunsthalle is an organization, a museum that doesn't have a collection. And the way the museum became a collecting institution was a rather funny story, in that an artist called Marisol, who was in the first exhibition at the MCA, donated the work that was in the show to the museum. And the reason that that happened was because the then director of the museum said that he couldn't afford to ship the work back. So that began a collection, and there was an incredible group of trustees of the museum at the time who, in the 70s, decided to bestow a number of major gifts to the museum. And yes, indeed, the majority of those works were from works of pop art, Western pop art, surrealism, and so forth. However, as you said, one of the things that this museum, I believe, has always tried to do is to try and shift the access by doing exhibitions and acquisitions that...
sorry, I want to interrupt you because they're the first museum that showed, I think, Frida Kahlo, was it? And Dan Flavin?
The first museum survey of Frida Kahlo in the United States was at the Museum of Contemporary Art.
And Dan Flavin?
Dan Flavin.
And people wanted their money back.
Yeah, when we did a show of Dan Flavin, that was before I was born, and people complained that these lights would look better on a Christmas tree. Dan Flavin is a very important, obviously, artist now, and the admission at the time cost 50 cents, and everyone was lining up to ask for their money back. But we actually have an archival exhibition on at the museum now, looking at the history, because we're 50 years old now, and you have actually the comment cards where people are saying all these kind of horrible things about that exhibition, but little did we know that this became, one of the most important artists. And I guess what we're trying to do now, with something that we've launched, we have a slide here that says making art history, how do we change it? And one of the things that we want to do now is to change art history, and to do that, it's to kind of shift include these inflection points where we shift the narrative by adding more global works. And we're taking a risk, in a sense, in so much as that we are bringing to the table artists that many audiences and trustees and stakeholders aren't aware of. But the idea is that we're trying to be pioneering, be a first, so that someone could say, we were the first to do this, and we actually were the first to do something that you're very proud of. We were the first American museum to buy a painting by the Syrian-German expressionist Marwan, and we did so literally, it accessioned into our collection literally a month before he passed away, which was very tragic for me as a thing.
It's a beautiful work from 1967, which is the year that the museum was founded, called the Knee. Do we have it here?
No,
I'm not sure.
So,
So going back just quickly to the MCA, imagine a museum that started, and I'm just using it as an example, a museum that started with a generally Western collection. When I was there last week, I went into the museum, and I want to talk to you about the process. I went into the museum was showing a lot of Western art, which is beautiful and wonderful, but I saw Munir Farmanian from Iran. I saw Marwan. I saw Itel Adnan from Lebanon. I saw Joanna Hadi Thomas Khalil Jurej, again from Lebanon, Lawrence Abu Hamdan. I can't remember the number of Middle Eastern artists. And so Akram Zakari and so many others. And so how do we get more American museums or more Western museums? And how do we get regional museums here also to be more globalized? Because it's a two-way conversation.
In regards to Western museums, I think it really revolves around this idea of education and creating context. And I think once you create context for people, stakeholders, but also publics, they engage with the work. And so someone like Marwan was very important, you know, arguably should be on the same standard as someone like George Baselitz. He was in the same school as him, but has gone unrecognized for decades until now. And so it's about creating context and explaining, even simply in a wall label, that this person was in this particular movement, which is not only tied to the Arab world, but tied to the global world. So it's really about creating context. In terms of here, I think there also should be a two-way conversation.
Should we buy, let me ask the audience one second. Yeah. Should Middle Eastern museums buy Western art? Wait, let's say.
All yes at once and all no at once.
Okay, all yes now. Okay, all no's now. Okay, I'm not sure that's correct because there's a couple of people who are louder than the others. So in any case, what I feel, Omar, is that it's a mixed, it's mixed.
It's mixed. Okay, maybe no is louder.
Okay, so the point by Salih Barakat is, should we not start by actually having museums first?
That's a good point.
Yeah,
Well, there's a museum here that just opened.
Okay, so this is a wonderful museum. Have you had a chance to go through the Louvre?
Yes.
First impressions?
Incredible.
Incredible. Why incredible? You're not getting away lightly. Why incredible? In terms of architecture or collection or display, what is it that you liked?
I actually grew up in the Gulf. I went to high school here, and one of the things that I always hungered to see was to understand the history of global culture in relation to the history of Western culture. And I felt that the opening exhibition, not without its problems, created a way for us to look at and understand how global movements which extend throughout history have happened in tandem and in parallel. Of course, the building itself is an agora, which is, you know, it's this beautiful temple that is open and breathing and alive, that is welcoming. And I feel that because we don't have that many museums and institutions in the region, to have a space that literally breathes and changes with the light is an incredible message to send, because you, the audience, will activate it through the way that you negotiate the space. Now, it remains to be seen how this will shift perception, or how it may encourage other museums to exist, and that's still a long journey. But for me, as someone who grew up in the Gulf when there was no institutions whatsoever, and we won't name the ones that exist now, but you know, there was nothing, and to suddenly see such an investment in art and culture, it's truly inspiring. And I was with a friend, an artist from Saudi yesterday, who we literally kind of started to get emotional because we are roughly the same age and we grew up at the same time, and there was nothing like this for us to see. And although, of course, you know, there's so much more room for growth, it's a special moment.
Okay, but it's not enough. Okay, wait.
It's not enough.
You guys think it's enough what we have? No. Okay, so I mean, I think in general, we want to see more institutions. I want to talk about an institution here in the UAE that I'm a fan of, and you're involved with, coming up, Sharjah Art Foundation, which is a unique institution in the sense that they oversee a fair, a biennial, which is every other year, a biennial, and they have a collection. They have spaces, but they don't have a space where they show the works, the permanent works. I mean, let's discuss this model, because I feel like this is a unique model to Sharjah Art Foundation. Are there other models like it? I'm not sure.
The Sharjah Art Foundation, I think, is one of the most unique organizations, and I think we're privileged to have it in the UAE and in the Arab world, or in the Manasa, because, well, it's truly the product of a very organic growth. The Sharjah Biennial began first as a platform, and from the biennial grew a foundation. The foundation was focused on production, partly because the biennial was focused on production, and then the biennial started, the foundation started to also acquire work, which has often been seen in the biennials actually, and in these exhibitions that they mount and stage. And what's particularly unique about that is that they stage major exhibitions, for example, like the Hassan Sharif retrospective, which is on now, which occupies all of their new spaces, including one of their older spaces, Beit al-Sarkal, as well as traveling exhibitions from the West, such as the Light Show from the Hayward Gallery, or international collaborations. And then it has the biennial, which really is a moment where they can bring in different voices to tell us what are some of the most urgent issues in contemporary art. And so it really operates on these very different levels. And then they also have residency programs, schools programs, production programs to enable artists globally. And then the kind of message of the Sharjah Art Foundation then travels the world. So I think it's a very unique model. I personally can't compare anything very directly to it off the top of my head.
And I was at the MCA. Sorry, I keep plugging the MCA, but I'm very proud of the institution.
It's not plugging.
Okay, yes, thank you. So I saw a piece by a Latin American artist, Brazilian artist, Jonathan Andrade, who showed at Sharjah Art Foundation, and then it was acquired by major museums. And I think he was shown here, as he was emerging, as he was being recognized. So it's a very avant-garde biennial, and that's not just Jonathan Andrade, but there's so many other artists who were shown here. And I think the curator, the director of the SF MoMA was curating one of the biennials. I'm not sure.
The curator from contemporary art, or who oversees contemporary art, curated the 2013 Sharjah Biennial.
So it's a very avant-garde biennial. As I said, it's a unique model, and we're very fortunate to have it here in the UAE. And they use their spaces very well. They have a lot of exciting programs in the spaces.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that governmentally has happened in Sharjah is that it has been built as this kind of cultural hub where there's a lot of production and of new work. There is a conversation between Arab contemporary and modern art with global art, and that conversation is very rich. And one of the things that I always say is that the United Arab Emirates, for me, also with platforms such as Art Dubai, becomes a meeting point for these conversations that you were asking about earlier, which enable things like people from here and from the Manasa to join and be involved with Western institutions. But it should also potentially be two-way, that people from Western institutions should be on boards and organizations here. And I don't see that as often. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have is this obsession with regionalism, which is that, if I'm from one place, I buy from one place, I support only these artists. And I think we need to be a little bit more fluid with how we support and how we think about where we put our support. So one of the things is, thinking about, do I support an exhibition or an acquisition or a biennial or a residency? and think specifically about your own needs and the needs of the artist and what makes the most impact in terms of changing art history. What we need now is to get our art history out there. And it's still going to be a long road.
I want to respectfully disagree with you with regards to regionalism. I feel, I'm not sure if you guys agree with me or not, but there's so few of us buying Middle Eastern, South Asian, North African works. And I feel like if we start buying Western, I mean, not everything, but if we start going into in-depth, that we would be missing an opportunity that we need to preserve. I don't know if you guys agree or not, but we should also buy Western, right? Yes, I think we should also buy Western, but I feel like it should be 70% buying from the region, maybe 30% buying Western, because we need to save and support artists from here.
I completely agree, but it is interesting to put someone like Ilya Kabakov, who's a historic Russian American figure, next to an Arab artist in a collection, and it helps create a context for someone coming from outside to see work in a different light, and also helps create for people here to contextualize art history globally, which is one thing that I feel that isn't taught in schools here is, how do these artists fit into their own genealogy or their own history, and how do they fit into global art history? But one thing that you haven't talked about is, yes, we need more museums, but we need also more publishing, and we need more scholarship, which is something that we're very much lacking. And we need to do more. We need to do more than simply acquiring works at art fairs.
Okay, so I have a couple of things I was going to mention. So yes, so Sheikh Ahour, president of Sharjah Art Foundation, sits on the board of MoMA PS1. So this is an excellent example of sort of regional talent also influencing art art in museums in the West. And one last question I wanted to ask you before we open up a couple of questions from the audience is, can you give us a sneak peek of what you're looking to do for Sharjah Biennial 14? You don't have to say anything. You can't tell us anything at all.
No, I can tell you what the themes are.
The themes, okay.
I can't tell you a single
This is an exclusive, by the way. First time ever anybody asked Omar in public. And I did not tell him I would ask him this question. In general, anything you can tell us.
Well, I know that I can't be sued, but we actually this week were very privileged to announce the theme of Sharjah Biennial 14, which is called Leaving the Echo Chamber. And the idea behind that was, what does it mean to live in a world where so much social, political turmoil is occurring? How do we exit those spaces to find different kinds of retreat and experiences, phenomenological experiences, i.e. singular physical experiences with objects of art? How do we find those spaces, and what artists are doing that? And so Leaving the Echo Chamber became the umbrella theme for 3 different exhibitions organized by 3 different curators. Mine is called Making New Time, which very specifically thinks about the notion of speed. We live in an era of constant speed and acceleration, and artists are working in new ways with augmented and virtual reality, but also they are referencing a whole art history that extends beyond the present. And so what I'm trying to do is to create a context for how we understand the different ways in which we look at art and the world today.
Okay, I have so many questions to ask Omar. I want to ask him about being a curator in Europe and being a curator in America, but I want to take a couple of questions from you guys. So if you have any questions, please put your hand up. Don't make a statement. I will cut you off after 20 seconds. I think there's someone over there. There's a girl, 5th row, I think. If you want to say who you are, you're welcome to as well.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sheikha and I'm an artist. I just wanted to hear a word from both of you guys on the importance of writing literature about the region, and how everybody in this room probably has an opinion, but nobody's writing about their opinions. And we really want that to be more prominent. And I just saw you posting on your story today in Insta stories about this young lady who wrote about the Louvre of Abu Dhabi. And I'm feeling that this has become very urgent, the need for literature to be written. So can you please elaborate on that? Thank you.
Yes. So my personal opinion is we still suffer from a complex of whatever is written outside about us is more important than when we write about ourselves. So I was very happy to read this young lady. I think her first name was Shamma, and she's a student at NYU Abu Dhabi, and she's the Louvre ambassador or something, I don't remember, but I thought her essay was excellent. It was better than a lot of what I read by international writers. So we have to believe in our local talent, and she's a student. She's not, you know, she hasn't worked yet. So that's why I shared her story. I was very much proud of what she had written. But as Omar said, we lack publishing. We lack the budgets to encourage others. And by the way, we also have to be tolerant of you know, the critical opinions. I can share with you a story. There was a gallery, there was a gallery here in the UAE that may or may not exist. I'm trying to be as sort of, how do you say, general as possible so as not to offend this person. And a local critic had written a review about an exhibition that this gallery has mounted, and then the owner of the gallery sent the critic, the journalist, an email and said, "You're never welcome into my gallery again." So I feel like this is exactly what we should be open to criticism, because maybe your next show is better. And you know how this region functions. It functions, there's a lot of, you know, sweet talk, and you have to say mujamalat. You have to say, you know, nice things about people, but we also have to, you know, if you think that my glasses are stupid, then it's your opinion. It's your right to say that. But we don't really accept critical opinions, Omar. Have you ever written a review about a show and then you were reprimanded, or people weren't happy, or you said an opinion about a show or something?
So before I started really working in museums, majority of my work was as a writer and a critic, and I did definitely encounter things that were very uncomfortable in terms of people not talking to me because I'd said, you know, artists not talking to me, or dealers, or museum directors, because I'd said something critical, and I'm the kind of person who doesn't, I'm not particularly mean. I'm just, you know, you can see I'm not a mean person, I hope. But harmless, like a hamster.
Except with your pen.
Except with my pen. I'm not also harmless. But anyway, the interesting thing is that I write the same kind of criticism. I write more academically now, and I only write about things that I'm passionate about, and I create historical context around particular kinds of work because I think it's more effective for me as a professional working in a museum to express or champion the things that I think are important and to help create critical context around it. Now, in terms of generally, yes, people in the region I feel are maybe perhaps a little bit less likely to accept criticism. I don't know if the term all press is good press applies here, as it does, say, for example, in the United States or in Great Britain. I also think that there's a larger problem, which is that not to do just with criticism, it's to do with actual art historical research. There are not many books about the history of art in the region. There are not books that tell us about, you know, all the intricacies and depths of modern Arab art and how artists began and the stories and how they met each other and how informal it was, and then how it became formalized and how there were progressive groups and groups that were creating local idioms. And there are, more and more there is now, but for me it's actually more important to develop there than to develop the museums. Mm-hmm. Why? Because a museum is a structure, and it needs a foundation, which is a piece of history or art historical context. And if you don't have that literature, if you don't have that foundation, how do you grow an institution? Mm-hmm. So I think that that's my number one thing for the region in terms of what we need to develop.
That's a very good point, because imagine you're in a committee of a museum and you're trying to acquire a work by a Pakistani, an Indian, a Middle Eastern artist, and then you say, well, let me pull out all the books about this artist. let me bring the collection of books about this artist. You encounter a problem because you're not sure that there are enough publications about her. So when you buy a work, you want to see the work in context, and it's so difficult. It's a big challenge, and I agree with you.
It also creates this thing whereby, you know, people, as I said, people need context to understand, and if there's no context to understand, then how do you convince someone to buy something? We're going a lot on relationships and oral histories, but those histories need to be put down and substantiated in a way so that we can move forward.
Okay. Any other question? Oh, I can't see. Okay, there's a lady in the front. If someone can give the lady in the front a mic. Is there anyone else who has a question in the meantime? There's a lady in the third row. Okay,
Hello.
I'll come back to you. I'll come back.
Hi, I'm Shamma. I'm from U.A.E, and thank you. Before I ask my question, thank you for your kind words about my article.
Oh, that was
Thank
yours?
you.
Well
Yes,
done.
that was
Well
mine.
done. Wallah, صراحة.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
I appreciate it. I have a small yet complex question. For both of you, how do you define the global museum? Can you define the global museum?
Okay. Do you mind if we take the question from the lady as well in front?
Sure.
Can you also give the lady in front the question? I don't want to forget. I'll come back to you. Sorry. Go ahead.
مساء الخير، أنا منى سعيد من جريدة الرؤية.
مرحبا.
سؤالي أنه كيف العمل لإيصال الفن الإماراتي المحلي عالميا.
طيب
يعني
شكرا.
البارحة
إيه خلاص من غير statement. Okay. ندخل. How do we take Emirati art global? Because we only have 10 minutes left. So the first question is.
What makes what is a global art museum?
And the second question from the lady is, how can we take Emirati art international? Okay.
Okay, so what makes a museum global is a perspective. It's not just the work that is in it or the work that is shown in the exhibitions. It's about an institutional perspective that is directed to trying to present a diversity of points of view. So, for example, saying, this is not the only history. There are multiple histories. We're not going to show you all the histories at once. We may show you them in pieces and fragments at different points. We may have some things. We may have some pieces of history and not other pieces of history, because it's very difficult for one museum to literally claim to encompass and represent all history. But so ultimately it comes down to a perspective and a commitment to thinking globally and in creating context for what that might mean.
Can you give us an example of a museum that succeeded in becoming, it's today seen as a global museum or could be a global museum?
I mean, I do think that Tate Modern is very much a global museum in terms of how it presents artists thematically as opposed to based on that. And I hope that our museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, I believe very much aspires and works to that goal. And I think that the Louvre Abu Dhabi will be a global museum if it continues to try and put into conversation different histories.
Okay, and then the question from the lady in front was, how do we make Emirati art global?
You have to answer that other question too, but maybe you'll answer it after I answer this one. But, well, Emirati art is quite global in some ways. You know, you have a fantastic pavilion at the Venice Biennial, which is an incredible platform. But to make it truly global, I think involves literature and scholarship. And literally to have experts and PhD students and people writing about this material, creating context on it and publishing it both locally and internationally. That's going to be the thing that helps people, it's going to pique people's interest who don't have the ability to see it. Because you can't consistently see everything. And so if it's written about, I discover a lot of my art through reading art magazines, newspapers, and so forth, if we have, and academic textbooks. So if it's written and offered about, well, and there is research and original scholarship done, then I truly believe it could be made global. I think you should answer both questions briefly, maybe.
I'm going to say I agree with Omar, and we're going to take other. Is it okay? Or do you want me
That's
to
fine, but whatever you want.
I actually would say that I wrote an article, I think it was in yesterday's Gulf News, about how we need a museum that shows Emirati art. Hats off to Sharjah Art Museum that has a wing that shows you Emirati art in the context of regional art. But I would like to see an institution that is for Emirati art, that invests in scholarship and writing and criticism of artists from the UAE as well. But for the sake of time, we've got 9 minutes left. I want to take at least 1 or 2 questions before I ask Omar. There's a lady in front here. Anyone else? And there's someone over there. This side never asks questions, huh? Okay.
Since you were questioning yourself if everything that you have is enough or not, I am very curious about if there is any dialogue, actually, what you say before, between Emirati leaders from different cities, because every one of us knows that Sharjah and Sharjah Biennale, Abu Dhabi and the mega projects, Dubai and the incredible galleries and everything. But is there already in a dialogue that visualize for the next future a kind of Emirati contemporary museum? Or something that put together all your forces?
Fantastic, wonderful. Let's go to the lady in the 5th row over there. 1, 2, 3, 4, I think. I can't count.
That question was for you.
Yes. I will answer your wonderful question. Over there. Yes.
Assalamu
alaikum.
اسمي عايشة علوي. My question is about can art flourish in a heavily censored region like the Middle East and the Gulf? And
fantastic question. Excellent. Okay. So the first question, do the leaders coordinate and collaborate and talk about? I have no idea. Okay. So, and now your question was, can art, it's fantastic. Yes. So the second, the question in the back was, can art flourish in a region that's very heavily censored? I want to start. I actually like art more that comes from regions that are, that are censored, because artists find a way to express themselves, and it goes over or flies over the heads of people sometimes, and they use a lot of allegory, a lot of metaphors, and sometimes, a certain item in a painting doesn't represent what you think it represents, or something else. It forces you to think a little bit when you look at the work. But I want Omar to say something.
I agree with you, and I mean, I don't only like art from that context, but I think that art that emerges from the context of struggle can be very important as a historical note, or as a representative, has a representative function in terms of telling us what historically was happening in a place at that specific moment. And for that reason, I think that art is important, that it should flourish and it can flourish, and it also functions in many different ways through what you said, metaphor and allegory.
I want to give a chance to this side of the room, your last chance to ask a question. Anyone on this side? Okay, there's someone is that the second row? I can't see. No, we need the mic. You're too far, I can't hear you. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm interested to know what role you think commissions play in building collections.
Great.
Do you want to answer that as well?
You can answer it.
Commissions are fundamental because as a curator, commissioning is your opportunity to have a revelation or insight into the creative process. And it also, often if an artist knows that a work will be acquired by a collection that is commissioned, they often will dialogue with its context, which is very important. For the MCA as an institution, we commission art, especially from younger artists, when we do an exhibition of their work. And in many cases, we have acquired that work, and because we feel that it is denotes a part of our history and is a way to literally take an exhibition, which obviously disappears. The collection is a DNA of a museum. It's about taking a piece of an exhibition and archiving it into a collection and saying, we did this. This was what we produced. This was a moment in time in history. So the institutions that commission and commissions definitely influence collections, and it's also important for artists because it helps create context around their work.
I want to ask you, I think this might be the last question, but I want to ask you about your experience, Omar, as being a curator in the Middle East, in Europe, and in North America. What are the differences? Are there any similarities? Are there any differences?
That's an hour-long conversation.
You've got 4 minutes.
But in the UK, the wonderful thing that I appreciated was that there was government funding for the arts. It wasn't full government funding when I worked in these institutions, but more than 50% in many cases were funded by the government, which allowed you to take at times more risks, which I thought was an incredible thing. However, there is less patronage because there isn't a civic culture of patronage because people believe that they pay their taxes and that the tax money goes in a circle to the institution. So why should there be patronage? There is no tax breaks in the UK for patrons, so they have to really be doing it out of a very particular passion. So in a way, the scale and ambition of projects actually is smaller in many cases, in my experience. Of course, the Tate is an example of how it can be huge, although the Tate is largely is more funded now by private donations than by government funding. The US, for me, is very different because it very much is about developing relationships with individuals and exploring their civic commitment and really relying on the power of an incredible community to help you build something. But there is always the risk and fear that, you know, you don't have government funding, so you have to build endowments. So, for example, I worked in an institution before that had no endowment whatsoever because there was always a guarantee or sense of guarantee that there would be government funding. There is some government funding in the US, a small amount, which is like 1%, I think, you know, like the National Endowment for the Arts. But the US is the only developed Western culture, in my mind, that doesn't have a minister of culture. So that, for me, is quite strange. We don't have a minister of culture that is directing an agenda. The Middle East, I can't even begin to comment because it would take too long, but it's a very difficult path to making exhibitions here. You know, I've made exhibitions in Egypt and across the UAE, and the experiences have been complicated for reasons that I can't go into that. But there was one hand that was raised. Do you want to take that question or no?
No, we have no time. We're sticking to time here. Timekeepers. Okay. So, Dr. Omar Kholeif, Manuel, Senior Curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art and Director of Global Initiatives, as well as co-curator of Sharjah Biennial 14. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sultan Al Qassemi.